That night, Dominic was sleeping soundly when the noise of a rifle firing brought him to full attention. Alexis shot out of bed, equipping her armor from a clothing gem, while Dominic pulled a sorcerer's robe over his head and stepped into his boots. Another shot was fired, then 3 more. "Oh, that's not good. It sounds like they're north of the village. How many farmers do we have that way?" Alexis asked. 9 families on the north side of the village. But the last 3 shots were pistols, so it might be the sheriff already there. Or the royal guard is too close to the threat. Dominic replied. Then they ran down the stairs and out into the early morning twilight. The sound of gunfire was becoming steady, as well as someone ringing a dinner bell and locals shouting orders to their families as they grabbed weapons. Dominic followed the sound of gunfire with Alexis at his side. Then John McKay joined them, followed by the sheriff. "Do you have firearms?" Dominic asked. Nate, the sheriff, nodded and drew his matched pistols, while John shook his head. "My lord, I don't need them." That was good enough for Dominic. The king's man had a dagger in each hand, and his run looked more like a casual lope, betraying his immense physical strength. After nearly 2 kilometers, firelight came into sight, and the sound of gunfire sounded much closer. "Careful not to get shot by accident." Alexis laughed at the thought. Wouldn't that be ironic? Shot by travelers in their own territory. "Hail to the camp!" Dominic shouted. "Ogres!" a voice shouted back. Those definitely hadn't been in the area yesterday. The defenders of the camp were led by a man in insignia military uniform, and he had a few adventurers with him, as well as 6 trailers behind a single steam tractor. Not an optimal setup for a convoy, but they had obviously been parked for the night when the attack started. Dominic lifted his rifle to his shoulder as he ran, and aimed high. Anything over 2.5 meters tall should be an ogre. Hard to mistake them even in the dark. Alexis took all the guesswork out of the fight when she fired a flare into the sky, and Dominic saw that it wasn't just ogres. There were 2 wizards behind them, hidden in the trees, and getting ready to run now that they had been exposed by the flare. "John, keep one alive. I want answers," Dominic muttered, and the farmer vanished into the dark. Alexis looked startled, but Nate didn't notice the man was gone. He was already focused on the fight and firing rounds at the ogres. He was using uncommon grade mana revolvers, and the level didn't seem to be very high, going by the limited damage they were doing to the magic-resistant ogres. The first shot from Dominic's rifle dropped an ogre. Then 2 more fell as Alexis fired with him for the second shot. The rifles were specifically made for this enemy, and the bullet holes were clear to see on the downed monsters. Then, magic bloomed in the woods, dozens of magical attacks in only a few seconds before stopping again. "What the hell?" Alexis asked. "Not wild ogres. There were mages guiding them," Dominic explained. That was when she realized that John was gone. But there was no time to ask questions. More monsters were coming, as was the royal guard. The only one that Dominic didn't see was Colonel Wilkes, who would have been assigned to rally the village defenses in case something reached the outlying farms and the town needed defending. The sheriff was too busy to form up the local militia, and both of the nobles were with him. So, letting the royal guard organize the village was the best they could do on short notice. Hobgoblins came from the woods, screaming as they charged past the dead ogres to assault the caravan. John reappeared and shook his head as his hands flashed an explanation. They self-destructed when they realized they were losing the fight. "Cultists are my guess. Most likely under the Archmage. I collected the bodies." That was an extreme level of devotion to a cause. But more disturbing was the idea that the war's earliest conflict was never really resolved, and they were still being targeted by monster groups led by foreign mages. The Archmage was never apprehended, and Dominic didn't know where he was supposed to be living, other than in Dago somewhere. So, it was possible that he was the force behind Prince Kaizen and his insane tactics. The hobgoblins got closer, so everyone switched to pistols, except the caravan guards, who had set a spear wall to stop the charge. Hundreds of shots were fired, collapsing the momentum of the hobgoblin charge, and the battlefield fell silent. "Search the area," I want to know if there are goblins with them that might be going after the farms or the barony upriver. William doesn't have a guard set yet, Alexis ordered. Two of the royal guards rushed off, while Alexis turned to see who was leading this convoy. A middle-aged nobleman in a general's uniform, and carrying a classic steam rifle, gave her a smart salute, then slumped forward, using his rifle as a walking stick. "Good to see you, princess. We were intending to come to you in the morning, once we found the manor house." He greeted them. Alexis looked confused. "The manor is along the river. If you follow the river, you can't miss it. What are you doing so far out?" She replied, "Muddy road sections. I only have one tractor. A large one, granted, but only one for the 6 trailers. His Majesty has seen fit to grant me a barony under your jurisdiction, but my military merits weren't high enough to buy more equipment," he explained. Alexis nodded, and Dominic cleared his throat. "Oh right, I don't believe that we have met. Duke Dominic, I am General Keith, now Baron Keith, of whatever manor you see fit to settle my family at." Dominic shook the Baron's hand. "There are a number of complete and intact manor houses in the area. One on a hill by the river is taken, but there is another not far from here that will be suitable. It's got a large amount of good cropland, and while it might leave you short on tractors, the fields have been good about volunteer crops that you can harvest for your first season." The general smiled. "That is a relief, Your Grace. My dearest sister and the children weren't looking forward to living off naught but dried supplies and her cooking for the foreseeable future." Dominic chuckled. "No household staff with you?" "No, Your Grace. I am not a highborn man, just the younger son of a younger son, who married a nobleman's younger daughter. It was my merit that earned the rank of general, and my war record that earned me the barony. Until last week, my family was living on a small farm under my uncle in the east near the Mitfield border. That explained a lot, including why they had capable guards but no household staff. The guards were most likely his sons and nephews, trained on the blade and spear for the war. In that case, there are a number of common families with daughters of the age where they will be looking for work. I'm certain that at least one of them has a daughter who is well versed in the domestic arts, and suited to become a lord's housekeeper," Dominic suggested. Baron Keith chuckled. "Perhaps an older spinster or a widow. I wouldn't want to give my wife the wrong idea." Dominic winked at him. "If in doubt, let her pick. Who knows, she might find a young married couple willing to become the caretakers for your manor." It was a common thing for generations of a family to serve the same baron's house in wavemates. Keith nodded. "You are a wise man, for a newlywed. Indeed, I will let my wife choose the domestic help from what is available. She is a woman of many skills and great business acumen, but her cooking leaves much to be desired. Worse, she's the best out of the lot of us." It did make army life a bit easier, though. Once you're used to biscuits burned near to hardtack, army food doesn't seem all that bad. The rest of the group finished clearing the area and checking for any monsters that might still be hiding, but Dominic could see that nobody in the new Baron's convoy was going to be getting any more sleep tonight. It wasn't quite morning yet, but if they started to pack up the camp, it would be light enough to move by the time they were finished, and Dominic could ask Alexis or the guards to lead them to a suitable manor. Alexis had the same idea, and she brought Ella with her, map in hand. "Baron, it's a pleasure to meet you. Has Duke Wistover checked your royal decree yet?" she asked. Dominic hadn't thought of that. He simply accepted the man's word that he was elevated to Baron. Keith took out the letter, which Ella checked quickly, then handed back. "Her Highness knows the perfect spot for your family to settle. We already scouted the area, and intend to settle the best of the baronies closest to the ducal estate first, leaving those with poor land or too much distance for later," she explained, speaking for the princess. Baron Keith smiled. "That would be wonderful." Duke Dominic mentioned that the barony manors might still have some suitable items left in them, and my family didn't come from wealth, so getting to move into a prepared estate will truly help us keep up appearances. I don't know your position on having my family do a large portion of the farming, but there aren't enough of us for a whole barony, so we will be coming to you to discuss how to get sharecroppers to move in." Ella nodded. "Bring that directly to Duke Dominic. Most of the locals are loyal to the Wavemates family as much as they are to their local lord, so they will flock to his name more easily than a newly appointed baron. Baron Keith chuckled. I suspected that might be the case when I was granted this title. The people of Wavemates gave the Dagos army hell for an entire decade. The city folk are mostly accepting of the rules that were placed on them, but the lords had to send forces twice a year to collect tithes and food shipments, or they wouldn't be forwarded by the bureaucrats. I served in this portion of the assault, you see. The locals were more than eager to help us change their leadership, but I doubt that is going to extend to them being warm and welcoming to Signia, unless we manage to prove to them that we deserve it. Dominic nodded. In that case, you've come to the right spot. Fear not, we will find you enough workers for your barony. We've been getting families every week, usually twice, courtesy of the Merchants' Guild. Now, once you're packed up, I will accompany the Royal Guard to help you settle in. There are a few things that I should do first, before your family arrives. That was when Alexis and the others remembered that none of the other baronies had been cleared. There were still skeletons in the yard and house from the battles, which would not go over well with the family of the baron. Nothing would chase them away quite as quickly as believing their new house was haunted. Though, that could be amusing in its own way. There weren't likely to be any barony manors here that hadn't been the site of a vicious battle during the invasion by Dagos. No matter where they went, they would be living on a battlefield. Ella showed Dominic the intended site, and he nodded. I will go prepare for your arrival, and I will see you in an hour or two. John moved to stand beside him. My lord, I will accompany you. It's only right that someone helps with the heavy lifting. It helps keep up appearances. The king's man signed, aware of what they were likely to find. Certainly, it wouldn't be anything good. Dominic and John raced through the woods, checking for more signs of intruders as they made their way to the barony. If there was one group led by cultists, there might be more. And they may have been targeting Dominic and the princess again, not just randomly attacking travelers. It didn't take a genius to figure out that these were most likely part of the same force that had attacked Signia, perhaps ones who had escaped, or one of the forces that was successful. But neither found any sign. It was as if the whole horde of ogres had simply appeared out of thin air, or had been following the overgrown road without damaging the surrounding trees, which would be very unusual for ogres. The manor the princess had chosen was not far, and on the same side of the estate as the attack. However, it was also one of the least damaged buildings, as the battle had occurred in the fields and the force had been called to the Earl's estate before they could loot much. This is going to take a minute. There are a lot of skeletons in the fields. John sighed. Dominic nodded. That will be the case everywhere. I cleaned up the farms around the estate when we first arrived. Or, the Royal Guard did most of the work while I built the crypt. But every estate has remained untouched since the war, and that means we're going to find the aftermath at every farmhouse and barony. John nodded. I understand, Your Grace. I have a storage ring, and I will gather as many as I can find. You can do the barony manor so that it's ready for the family. They're unlikely to notice what I'm doing, as long as the main house is ready for them. It's the great thing about being a farmer. Everyone just assumes that I belong wherever I am, as long as I'm not inside a city. Dominic laughed. The man had a good point. Nobody questioned the presence of a farmer in any field, except the farmer who actually lived there. Even if he was in town, you would just assume that he needed something. But a nobleman in the fields, or at a discount inn in the city. That was suspicious. Dominic entered the house, and found that the interior was going to need a bit of a refresh. The majority of the battle had been outdoors, and he collected those skeletons as he went in, but the front door had been battered in, and there had also been a fight in the front room. Dominic assumed that it would be the great hall for the barony, as all the bedrooms looked like they were on the second floor. But he had to work quickly. A quick blast from the torch stored with his smithy tools scorched the blood on the floor, and Dominic tossed an oil lantern in the middle of the patch. It was obvious that there was a battle here, but as he moved through the house checking for bodies, the house wasn't actually in too bad of shape. This one didn't have a Magitech panel in the basement to do repairs, but a few patches with fieldstone wall was enough for the worst areas, and the carpenters could be called in for the rest. As the beams looked solid, and the floor didn't flex or creak too badly. There had been a battle in one of the children's bedrooms, so Dominic simply stripped everything into his storage space except the furniture. Let the new Baron think that this had been an unused guest room. Then, he headed back outside to find John waving to the new arrivals, whose convoy was slowly trundling across the grassland with its one overloaded tractor. Perfect timing. Did you get it all? John signed, and Dominic gave him a thumbs up as he waved to the Baron. Park right out front. I checked the house for damages and wildlife. It should be safe to move in, and I didn't see any bugs. He greeted them. A matronly woman in the passenger seat of the tractor laughed. That is wonderful news, Your Grace. The cats won't mind if there are a few mice around, but I've never been fond of bugs. You must be the new Baroness. Welcome home. Feel free to take a look around before you start moving furniture. We haven't gone through all the farmhouses yet, so the extended family might have work to do, but the main house is in good shape. Dominic replied, I think that we can manage that. None of us are under any illusions that the houses will be newly built or contain a ton of gold worth of Magitech. Though I do see that the house has Magitech lights. Baron Keith explained. Dominic nodded. There is a Magitech stove as well, but that's it. Those two things were pretty standard for every nobleman's house in Wavemates. The Baroness smirked and poked her husband. Now, you don't have to stop working at dark. You can just turn the lights on and finish the job. Keith sighed. Can we take the lights out? Unfortunately, they're all through the house, even the basement. But if you don't have anyone who can use them, you might luck out and get to go to bed at dark. That's a luxury that most of us don't have. Nobody would believe that I can't turn the lights on with my magic, when even the maids can do it. Dominic joked. The Baroness giggled. Even at home we had a Magitech lamp. They're not hard to work, even if you have very limited affinity with Magitech. I don't think that we will have any issues with the lights in the new house. Thank you, Your Grace. This looks like a wonderful manor, and it's much larger than I had expected. Dominic nodded politely. The princess chose it, likely based on the size of your family. But most of them are designed for larger families or many guests. Hospitality is part of a noble's duty, after all. Dominic kept up the friendly chatter as he followed Baron Keith around his new property, and explained how things were set up before the area was abandoned. Unlike the estate closer to the river, this one was all open fields, with an irrigation canal that was filled using a Magitech pump. Not fancy, but that single canal ran in a loop around the barony, and as long as the river was still flowing well, they could get enough water to irrigate the entire 1,000 acres. The issue was that large portions of the irrigation network, which had been made up of Magitech sprinklers at the corners of fields, had been damaged. It would take time and money to repair them, so until that could be done, they would have to be tested, and most of the fields would survive on natural rainfall. They were about to enter the rainy season or the winter season, depending on how you looked at it. So, the work could be delayed for some time, but half a year at the most. Just enough time for them to get a full round of crops out of the fields and earn some coin to do the work. Baron Keith chuckled as he listened to Dominic's concerns about the irrigation. Well, according to the record books, this region gets more rain in the dry season than we did in the east, so I reckon that we should be fine. At worst, only some of our fields will do as well as we hoped. But I don't see it turning into a disaster. He replied happily. Dominic nodded. In that case, I will leave you to it. Most of what you need is already in the house, though a few rooms need to be cleared and everything needs a good deep cleaning. Ella came over to join them, and gave Dominic a positive gesture that he assumed meant that the Baron's family was hard at work getting the house ready, and that he hadn't missed anything important during his cleansing. Well, that is our cue to head back to the house. Good luck with the morning's work. If you need anything from town, the shops will be open in a few hours. The bakery is already fired up, so give it 2 hours at the most and there will be fresh bread. I know it's a fair trip, but you've got some horses with you. It shouldn't be more than 10 minutes each direction. Dominic reminded them. Oh, good point. We will have to clean the kitchen before we even try cooking, and it would be best if we could find a cook right away, before the Baroness gets protective of her burnt pans. Ella's laugh echoed a little in her helmet as she tried to stifle the sound, but the Baron just smiled and turned to return home. Dominic fell in beside her as the royal guard set a loping jog back toward the manor, then motioned for John to join them. What did you find on the bodies of the wizards? Were they human? Any identifying marks? Dominic asked. John shook his head. Human, yes. Definitely classically trained mages. I know that magical signature anywhere. But not locally. If my guess is right, they were from somewhere in the deep south. Moorish, perhaps Aranzania. There is a chance that they were trailing the carnival, but given recent events, it seems more likely that they were actually hiding in the wilderness and looking for targets. Ella nodded in agreement. The way that they led the attack on the Baron was familiar. That mindless aggression isn't something that they train at the Mage Towers, but it's how the ones that the royals faced all reported during the assassination attempts. They might be aiming to get revenge for messing up their plans in Albroles. John frowned, then nodded. That makes sense. If my sources are right, the prince was never there, only a duplicate. So, whoever is backing him knows that the two of you had a hand in ruining the coup. Or was the royal guard at home? I have heard conflicting versions about who was with the princess. Dominic chuckled. The royal guard was providing cover for her in the capital, while the natural sons were with us. John took out a small cloth bag. This the only surviving object that might give us any sort of clue, with the damage they did to themselves to prevent capture. But all that's in it is a bunch of Dago's silver and copper. Ella took the bag from him and hefted it in her hand. It's not enchanted, but the bag itself is a clue. It's made from indigo-dyed velvet. She noted. Indigo is native to the Kynwan region, and this isn't particularly high quality. But still, that is a good clue as to where the mages were living. John agreed. And to their actual wealth. Dominic noted. Your money pouch isn't something that you often replace, unless it has been stolen. This one has been well worn, and it was never expensive. So, they're probably not from a more prestigious background, or a well-known mage academy. Ella nodded. I will look into any academies, either near here or in the south, that use indigo as their uniform colors. It might have been issued, if they were younger mages. They were. Not more than 25. John agreed. Then I will inquire and scour the records that we have. There is bound to be something that we can use as a lead if there were no identifiable marks on them or their belongings. She muttered. John shrugged. Their self-immolation was pretty thorough. The coin purse was dropped when I cut through a sash and coat. The royal guard turned to Dominic. Why is there never a moment of peace? You were supposed to bring us to a nice remote area, where I could lounge around on shift, drink my evenings away, and then retire to become that spinster who hits on all the young guardsmen in the tavern. Dominic chuckled. I'm not sure if I should admire your dedication to debauchery, or chastise you for the things you're planning to do to our future guard recruits. John split off to return to his farm, but Ella waited until they were almost to the manor to ask Dominic about the situation. Would you care to explain who that man is, and why you trust him? Dominic patted her on the shoulder. He is one of the Dragon King's men, an assassin from the old Wavemates kingdom. He's come here to live mostly as a farmer, but he doesn't have any problems helping out when we've got trouble. The royal assassins were said to be unbreakable. None ever turned. None ever betrayed the crown. Few were ever outed to the public and forced into seclusion. Having him here is a blessing, in a way. He knows more about treachery and deceit than the vast majority of the population, and his loyalty is unquestionable. Ella paused, forcing Dominic to stop as she thought. Are you certain about his loyalty? She asked. 100%. You can keep an eye on him if you like. But it's a bit like suggesting that the second prince would rebel. Dominic replied. You trust the old empire's people far too easily. I will take your word on his identity, but that still makes him a threat to the princess, even if he's not a threat to you. Dominic frowned, then nodded. I understand. Then Ella shook her head. We're going to need to start formalizing a military force for the duchy sooner than planned. We've got lots of former military officers among the residents, but they're not trained to work together in this particular group. They're also not properly equipped. For most of them, their equipment was left behind when they left the army, so they didn't arrive here with a full suit of armor and weapons. Dominic shrugged. We can likely get started on that today. News of the ogre attacks will the talk of the town, and everyone will be motivated to have something done about it. As long as we frame it the right way, I doubt that we will have any issues forming a militia force or organizing group training sessions for the capable fighters. Ella nodded. Alexis plans to train the maids as well. A force of veiled maids in the manor will provide additional security from a direction where nobody will expect it. When soldiers break in, they are wary of the guard and the larger men like the stable hands. Nobody fears the maids. All right, I will spread the news in town. I will talk to the innkeeper and arrange for a dinner for everyone who comes to the training. They all know the basics, and we can have the sheriff train up some of the boys later. The expensive part will be equipping them. Well, that will be the time-consuming part anyhow. I am thinking that we should train them both with pistols and swords so that they can take advantage of the duchy's unique skills. Pistols were a game-changer this morning, so if we can equip some of the farm families with them, we can have them start effectively defending the area with far fewer members. Plus, we have a proper gunslinger as a sheriff, and he will be able to get them up to speed without relying on the royal guard. Dominic agreed. Ella smiled behind her visor. There is also the likelihood that they'll be much more cohesive as a fighting force when it's the commoners training the commoners, with the lord's money backing them. That's how things always go. If you put a nobleman in charge of their training, it introduces that class gap between thinking and doing. They'll wait for someone to tell them when to fight. If you arrange it all with commoners, they'll actually use a bit of common sense. That's not a bad idea. We've got a retired general as well, and his family is on hard times. I'm sure that a little extra income to train and organize the militia won't go unappreciated. Well, technically we have 2 generals if you count Baron Keith. But you know what I mean. Their joking brought them to the entrance of the house, where Dominic could smell fresh bread and frying eggs. Both excellent signs that the day was off to a good start. Alexis greeted them at the door. Is everyone settled in over there? Dominic nodded. Yeah, they're good for now. But we were discussing the fact that we should have some sort of organized militia in the village. We've got so many people now that we're going to attract more trouble, even when it's not targeted trouble. Speaking of which, have you ever seen a bag like this one before? We were thinking that it might be from a school. Alexis turned it over in her hand, then nodded. It's from the Skipple Mage Academy. Not the Royal Academy, the lower academy. See here, it's got the S embroidered on the inside, but its enchantment has been stripped. They should have a spell on them to prevent them from being damaged. Either it's old, or whoever was using it decided that it wasn't worth renewing. Now, that was the first bit of useful information that they had about the attackers so far. But that left them with the question of why a mage from Skipple was all the way down here in the Stantia province, 3,000 kilometers from home. They might have been working for Dagos, at least on a surface level. But the fact that they had launched an attack with ogres suggested that there was much more to the story. A story that really needed resolution, especially if it was connected to the siege of the Signia capital by monsters not long ago. Should I ask Father to send soldiers to the region? Alexis suggested. Dominic frowned. Not yet. I will start training up a militia later, and arming a team of huntsmen. We can call for reinforcements if we come up against something we can't handle. This might just be a straggler from the attacks. With everything still tense in Dagos, the king doesn't have too many soldiers to spare. It's better that we train our own. Alexis smiled. In that case, I will start training the maids as well. That afternoon, Dominic went to meet with General Alater at his family's farmstead, looking for a trainer for their militia force. The old man came out to greet him at the door, and Dominic went straight to business. It has come to our attention that with the monsters in the area, and possible threats from Dago's loyalists, we are going to need a militia or guard force as soon as possible, and I was hoping that you would be willing to come out of retirement to help train them. Dominic began. The old general chuckled and looked around at his crowded family home. Well, if it's a paying position, I don't see any harm. We're doing better than expected. But there still isn't too much work in town. They weren't experienced farmers, but they were doing well enough, Dominic noticed. Nobody wanted to look bad in front of the boss, But there were new curtains in the house, and the yurt was built up on a wooden platform to prevent muddy ground from damaging belongings or inviting pests. Not glamorous, but functional. I can offer you a standard wage as a weapons trainer. It might not make you rich, but it's something. Dominic offered. The Alator family elder nodded. It would be enough to provide the basics for his family, even if they were living in town. With the farm acres, it would be enough to start really living comfortably. All right, I will agree to do the training. But who are we even going to train? Are you going to draft militia members? He asked. Dominic shook his head. We've got plenty of soldiers in town. I will ask for volunteers. Plus, we will do some training with the huntsmen so that they're fully equipped to deal with small groups of monsters. The old general laughed and ran his hand through his thin white hair. Don't forget that we all came from Dagos. Not a one of us, but the sheriff has a magical weapon, even if we've been trained for combat. He mentioned, speaking slowly. Dominic nodded. I understand, but I have weapons. Plenty of weapons. There were some in the manor and I have more. Plus, I'm a gunsmith by trade. I will equip the militia with pistols and swords, the huntsmen with magitech rifles, and I will ensure that there is a supply of spears available in case of attack. General Alator chuckled. Well, now that is a whole different standard than they're used to. All they would need after that would be armor and a tabard to be a proper militia. Dominic nodded. I will get to that eventually. But first, we just need to get enough of them trained to keep the area safe. That should be easy enough. But I would recommend at least getting some cloth from one of the caravans so you can make them all matching coats. It makes them feel more official and gives them courage. Dominic nodded. If you're free, I'm headed into the village to set things started. We can inform the other farms on the way, but I will need to swing by the hunters' houses. Then I will meet you there. Most of the villagers know who I am already, if they didn't know me before. I will get them organized if you can inform the hunters. How much equipment did you have for them today? Dominic shrugged. I've got swords and spears. I will make them all pistols in the next few days, and then I will start on the rifles. It was going to be a very long few days. Making a half-dozen rifles for the huntsman out of spare parts wasn't a big deal, but even if he was using clay to steel, it still took time to make a new manner revolver, and they would need to arrange at least a dozen men who were competent with them. Dominic jogged off to the huntsmen's houses, and informed the men he found there that they were training a militia, which would include the hunters, as they would effectively be the village's scouts because of their jobs. The majority of them understood very well, though a few of the woodcutters were more interested in simply using a good whistle to call for reinforcements than actually learning to stand and fight. After explaining that the majority of the trouble was likely to be goblins and other roaming monsters, or wild boars, they understood that having proper weapons would make their lives safer. Though they were just hunters and woodcutters, they wouldn't turn down a good weapon, even if it meant taking the training that the Duke was insisting on to form the militia. It was actually fairly uncommon to have a training regimen. Many lords would simply assume that everyone would figure it out when they were called up to fight. That naturally led to insanely high militia death rates. But they only took young men, so the women left at home could just make a new generation to replace the one lost to war. Of course, Dominic wasn't going to mention that all the magical swords he was planning to hand out were obtained from the battlefields in the duchy. The old owners didn't need them, and putting them all in the crypts just wasn't space efficient. There were a lot in the village crypt already, but Dominic hadn't buried any from the outlying areas or the baronies. Once everyone had been notified, with most planning to come the next day, as they had work to finish, Dominic returned to the village and stopped at the tailor's to order coats. Ah, Lord Dominic, I was expecting you to be here soon. Will you be ordering uniforms for the militia? The older of the two tailors working the shop asked. Dominic sighed and looked at the number of men on the training ground. It looked like every family sent at least one person, and there were close to 50 gathered in the middle of town. Yeah, coats and pants. You can make the pants loose fit with a tied waist. No need for a perfect fit, and then when we get armor for the regulars, they won't need a replacement. Dominic agreed. But coats will need to be fitted. That's not an issue, we will get them all to come in for a quick fitting, and we've got templates for military coats. We just need to know what sort you want made. That was a good question. Should they be Signia Royal Army colors? Or should he make them a local pattern to mark them at town guards? Dominic considered the options for a few minutes, then decided to go with the same uniforms that the earldom had been using. How about simple green wool coats? Practical for the winter and general wear. Everyone will know what they are, even if they can't see the badges. Just stitch the Wavemates family dragon on the left sleeve, or apply it with a patch. I will pay you to make a bunch of them, if you have a machine to mass produce them. Dominic suggested. The tailor nodded. Indeed, I have a Magitech embroidery machine. Once I input the patch, I can make you 100 of them in only a few hours and sew them on all the militia coats. Green pants as well. Dominic shook his head. Green coats, brown pants. It hides the mud better. That was how the locals had always done it here. Practicality before all else, with a side of camouflage when wearing it in the woods. When you were working, there was no need to draw attention to yourself. All right, we will get right on those. As long as you don't mind serged seams, we can make uniforms from templates pretty quickly. No more than a week to make the whole order. Dominic nodded. That works for me. Make a few sizes of pants, and you can start on the coats for anyone whose size you know. I will send them by for measurements over the next few days. The tailor nodded, and Dominic set a small bag of silver with a few gold coins in it on the counter. Advance payment for materials. I will settle the difference when all the uniforms are made. The other tailor opened the bag and nodded. There might not be much to settle. We're just making good wool coats and durable pants. Even in bulk, they're not expensive and made to the standard for common soldiers. They're also very fast to make. Dominic shrugged. Even better. If you need me, you know where to find me. I'm heading to the training area now, so I can give everyone the good news and distribute some weapons to get them started. I know that I should probably be better about knowing the cost of things, but I somehow got shuffled between the two states of never buying anything at a reasonable price. The tailors chuckled. Too poor and too transient to buy anything, and then too noble to buy anything from a common vendor. We heard a little about your adventures insignia from Pops at the tavern last night. Though I am surprised that you never went to the West Coast, where sorcerers and the beast-blooded are much more common. It wasn't that he had never thought of it. He just couldn't bring himself to be thousands of kilometers from home. He had preferred to be the despised outcast than to give up on the slimmest chance of vengeance and simply leave. Dominic waved goodbye and headed for the training ground, where the general and the sheriff were still working to sort out the ones who were capable and had time to do the duty from the ones who just wanted to look good for the Duke. After all, there was never a bad time to make a good impression. Your Grace, I believe that we've chosen the team leaders for the militia already. They were all city guard officers in the past, elevated to that status despite common birth. Just how many others will need to be trained is questionable, but we're hoping for at least one or two from every section of the farms. General Alater greeted him. That is faster than expected. But I can't say that I'm surprised. I knew that you would be the right choice for the job. Did all the team leaders you picked have a combat-related trade skill core? Dominic replied. He looked through the gathered men, and saw that almost all the Grandbutte Town Guard from the last batch of arrivals were present. That was practically a pre-built militia or town guard on its own. But General Alater only picked a few of them as team leaders, and then brought forward Omar Khalil, Captain Brass, and the half-ogre woman. Then Cutter, the aging hunting dog, joined the end of the line. The dog was eager for a treat, and the chosen team leaders laughed. We can't turn him down. He's probably the best of all of us at picking out threats. Omar joked. Dominic handed over a ham bone to chew on, and the dog settled down to snack. Dominic reached into his storage cube and brought out a whole stack of uncommon grade swords, leftovers from the invasion, but good enough for defending against weaker monsters. We can start everyone with these, and I will make pistols for all of the militia members. That way, you will be able to properly defend the farms and village until reinforcements can arrive. The hunters and the princess will all be out checking for threats before they get close enough to threaten the farms, so I will be providing them with a Magitech rifle to use in their duties. Well, the princess and her royal guard already have some. I will provide rifles for the hunters, unless you prefer to stick with a bow or crossbow. Dominic informed them. The hunters were torn. Bows were better for hunting, as they didn't scare away game. But they wouldn't argue against having a rifle available if they should come across a wandering monster or a wild magical beast too powerful for a regular bow. The general clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. There you have it. The Duke is going to fully equip the militia force. I see that he just came from the tailor, so we will have uniforms coming soon, and he's given us enough magical swords to get everyone started, he announced. Dominic nodded. The rest of the gear will come over the next few days. Swords are what I had ready, but I will arrange spears as well. A good spear wall solves many things. All the potential militia nodded in agreement with that. If the Duke didn't have any objections, every farm would have a handful of spears by the door. Not magical, obviously, that would be too expensive, but just being able to keep the monsters further from them was a great safety measure. Especially here, where all the farmhouses were stone, and not flimsy clapboard or thin lath and plaster that even a hobgoblin could smash its way through. Dominic motioned toward a bench near the town's central fountain. I will sit and watch for a while if you're going to be doing any training. If not, I will be available for questions and concerns, he offered. The general nodded. No training today, but we will pass out the weapons just in case. An afternoon every week is what most forces train, but for the first few weeks we will do every other afternoon. I know that takes you all away from your duties, but if the training goes well, it can be shortened. A few of the gathered men chuckled. Almost everyone who had volunteered had either military training or a recent position as a city guard, and very few did not have any combat experience. Especially the huntsmen. They had been doing their jobs in their last home all their lives. So, the training was mostly just to make them work together and to get to know their new teams. But the general knew that, and what he started on as Dominic took his seat were the basic wavemates military signals, so everyone would know if a suspected intruder was actually a local. Those signals weren't a secret, just unused for a decade. But now that Signia had taken over, and the region was under a Signia-appointed duke, nobody would be expecting them to be using the old signals for the town guard. That would be much more certain as a way to tell than using the Signia military signals that everyone would naturally assume were in use. He would teach them all the Signia signals as well once he learned them himself. But the general wasn't in a hurry. Even if Dagos contested the loss of this region, there wouldn't be a reason to use Signia signals for some time. Dominic took out his spellbook and worked on improving it as the teams practiced their basic signals, whistling the signal bursts to each other and laughing at the inability of many of the men to whistle without using the device. The day was sunny, and the training went on for 4 hours before releasing everyone with directions to meet back in 3 days for the next group meeting. They were also given instructions to practice their sword work if they weren't already skilled, as the next training would involve a bit of combat practice. The militiamen waved to Dominic as they parted ways, while General Alater came to sit beside Dominic on the bench. Not a bad plan, Your Grace. The continual use of magic gave them confidence that someone with power would come to help them out if they sounded the signal, and they're already building a decent community spirit. That was what I worried about most. Everyone came from different regions, and we can't afford to have factions infighting in the town guard this early. How is your Magitech artifact coming along? I noticed that you've put a lot of work into improving it, whatever you were doing, the general asked. Dominic finally looked down at the book and smiled. It's coming along very well. Give me another week or two, and I think that I will have it all ready. The sorcerer's spellbook was already at level 11, and the energy level that it was giving off suggested that it would reach level 12 soon. That might not be incredibly impressive, but it would put him above the average guardsman. After that, it was just a matter of time before he would be able to use all his spells at a level that would impress anyone. He was even getting close to the point where using clay to steel would make quality tools or gun steel. That was the most urgent need, Dominic thought. A short walk to the river would bring him as much good gray clay as he wanted to gather. So, the ability to turn it into quality weapons that he could enchant would be the most important asset in his upcoming attempts to establish the duchy as a destination to be proud of, not just a backwater village. But there was one other thing that they were going to need if they were going to be recognized as more than a backwater. Infrastructure. They had good cobblestone roads in the village, all the basic amenities of a small town, including a good cook at the inn. But they didn't even have a decent road in or out. They didn't even have one to the inhabited baronies nearby. That was something that Dominic could start on the next day. It would be a slow walk, but he could make a road to the closer of the two before dark. The new road would start at the edge of the old cobblestone. But when Dominic reached the desired spot, he realized there were two issues. One, the more efficient of his spells just turned the dirt to stone. But the road was already heavily rutted. Two, if he did it that way, then he would have to texture the surface to keep it from becoming slippery in the rain. So, doing the work today was going to take some additional hands. Fortunately, they already had just the right equipment for the job. All he needed was a tractor, a grater blade, and a padfoot roller. Both of those tools were in the yard behind the smithy, and that was where Dominic was already planning to go. The farmers might still have work left to do tonight, but with a promise of ale and a late dinner, Pops could be convinced to stay out late and give him a hand improving roads late into the evening. With the two of them working together, there was no reason they couldn't do at least one of the connecting roads tonight, and perhaps both. That should be a pleasant surprise for the next merchant caravan that came along, and with a bit of work, Dominic thought that he might actually be able to make a device that would activate the spell behind the road work tractor, so that a team of less capable magic users could do the work. If it proved functional, he was absolutely certain that the king would pay good money to get his hands on it. Too many of the road's insignia were still unimproved. As usual, Pops was expecting him when Dominic arrived at the door to the forge. "You have the look of a man on a mission. What's so important that you want to start it so late in the evening?" the old dwarf asked. "You've got a point. This can likely wait for tomorrow. I was thinking that I should level the road to the baronies, and then transform it to stone so we have good roads within at least the local region." Pops laughed. "You always want to do things the moment that you have the idea. But let's go back and have dinner. Then you can arrange for one of the staff or a farmer to drive the tractor tomorrow. You'll still get the work done before anyone even realizes that they need it, but you don't have to work all night." Pops spent a few minutes putting tools away and then gestured toward the manor. "Let's go get dinner." Beth said it would be ready just before dark. Pops was right. Dinner was about to be served when they got back to the house, and the house staff had made subtle but noticeable changes that made the place feel a bit more their own. They had changed out the curtains for ones in the signia blue and gold. There was a new carpet in the sitting area, and the dishes that they were setting out were from the princess collection, not what came with the house. "Just in time. I thought that you were going to waste all night doing busy work again." Alexis greeted them when she saw the pair walk in the door. Pops laughed and Dominic shrugged. "I thought about it, but Pops set me right." "What was it this time?" Alexis replied. "Roads to the baronies. They need to be leveled and preferably improved so that we can easily move people and goods." Dominic explained. "Oh, that's easy. Just have one of the farm boys run the tractor, and get a techno wizard to help. They have the spell to create stone roads, and they're not particularly busy. A bit of paid work from the duchy will be a big help to their pockets." Alexis informed him with a smile. "What would I do without wise people to stop my impulsive ideas?" Dominic joked. Alexis laughed quietly, while Pops smirked at him. "I think that we already know what you get up to when you're left unsupervised, don't we? Trust in the system. We've got so many people here now that there is no need for you to do everything yourself. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if there was more than one of the villagers who could claim a magical trade, but isn't working at one right now. If you put out hiring posters on the board in town the next time that you need work done, you might find some hidden gems." Pops suggested. They had gotten an entire village, Dominic realized. Most of them hadn't opened shops, but there were a few new ones being prepared. Everyone sat as the staff brought out the food, and Dominic noticed new cuts and bruises on the maid's hands. "I see that you've started combat training already," he noted. "Indeed. They were all willing, so we started staff training today while the villagers started training to form the defense force. They have potential, but it will still take significant time to get them all up to an acceptable standard. I might have to trouble you to make them some suitable equipment as well. We can't have maids going about carrying swords openly, and I don't have any more storage rings." Alexis replied. Pops nodded. A good knife does wonders. I know just the sort of thing that they need until we can start getting them more advanced magical items as part of their uniform. We've attracted quite a few good people to town, but no mage tower yet. Though I do have a few questions about how we're going to deal with all the people. If this keeps up, Westover will become a proper small city before long, and the duchy is quite small for the title. It may get to the point where we're going to have to start expanding settlements right to the edges of the granted territory before the end of the 2-year probationary period. Alexis frowned. There can't be that many people looking to move. Our estimates said that once the Dago's nobles were gone, there wouldn't be more than 2,000 or 3,000 total displaced residents in Stantia province. Pops gave Dominic a meaningful look. It's not so much about how many people are forcibly displaced without anywhere to rebuild a home. It's more about him and how many people will rally to the Wavemate's name. My guess is that there are a few thousand in each city, mostly the old military families, who will be looking to move to the duchy to start over. They're not displaced, but they don't want to be where they are. Dominic nodded. He has a point. More than one of the families that have come so far only left home because they were coming here. Once the Merchants Guild spreads the word of our arrival across the province, we're going to get a lot more people, and we're going to get them fast. Julio tapped the table to get their attention. If I might, it won't just be residents from Stantia province and the 3 cities that will want to return. After the invasion, the mage towers scattered into West Kyria and Chip. Some of those mages will want to come back as well. This region apparently has particularly rich mana, and they would have stayed if it were safe. Plus, there are still nomadic refugees in a bridge, even after a decade. Many of them will want to return, and Axbridge will be happy to see them gone. Alexis frowned. So, you're saying that we've got thousands of potential new residents just waiting on news to reach them? Residents who only plan to return because it is specifically our duchy they'd be returning to? The Castellan nodded. Plus the tens of thousands who want to return to their old homes elsewhere in the province, of course. That refugee influx was going to cause far more problems than it solved. The king had intended to shuffle them into a backwater duchy allotment and keep them somewhat isolated and out of the spotlight of royal politics. The 12,000 acres that belonged directly to the duchy were enough to support a village or a small town. But anything more than that would start to rely on imports that had been taxed by another noble, which was less than optimal for their needs. With 20 barons under them, the duchy would be fine, Alexis was certain. But income was the least of their concerns if they were going to start attracting enough refugees to start a city. For one, housing for them all. More importantly, she had intended to make use of Dominic's affinity for magic and magic users to build up a modern enclave with techno-magic a normal part of everyday life. If the duchy turned into a sprawling refugee slum, there was no way that was going to happen. At least not anytime soon. Should we start rebuilding houses in the village right away, and building new expansions closer to the manor? There is plenty of room for an expanded township site. Dominic suggested. The only issue with that would be funding. Hiring magic users to build houses wasn't cheap, and many of the people who would fill them would arrive with nothing but what they could carry. He knew. Not long ago, he was one of those travelers. Julio smiled. I can have the guild send an architect if you would like. I think that fieldstone row houses would fit the theme of the village very well, and it would help house numerous people with only limited space. Alexis nodded. That sounds good. The row houses in the commoner districts really helped clean up the slums when I was young. If we build them now, perhaps we can avoid that stage entirely. Gods only know how the hunters and others who live in the woods would respond to vagrants stomping through their yards. Dominic smirked. Well, fortunately for us, almost all the hunters live on the south side of the river. There are a number of woodcutters and the witch coven on this side of the river, but the river will keep some of the sprawl contained. It's not easy to cross without using the bridge. Alexis nodded. Then, Mr. Julio, we will ask you to request the services of an architect. Simple houses are well within our abilities to build and rebuild. But if we're going to expand the city and keep all the amenities that I would like, then we should have a professional take over. A full Magitech development is in order. Running water, Magitech stoves, and lights at the very least. Julio smiled. I would expect no less, Your Highness. But I would suggest that a few more family compounds, similar to the one that the Khalil family resides in, are added. There are only 4 of them in town, and 2 are mostly burnt. While the duchy might not officially have a noble district like the capital, there will still be need for well-appointed housing for those with wealth and large families. The combination should give a reputation for having suitable housing for every situation, and it will prevent wealthy families from moving to the baronies and pressuring them to allow an oligarch free rein in exchange for money. Alexis sighed. You make an excellent point. Anywhere that a royal ends up tends to get flooded with wealthy families looking for connections. The same is bound to happen here, and if we don't prepare for it, we're going to run into issues with them bullying our newly appointed barons. Many of them are from noble families as well, with connections and political influence. So, we should prepare a number of larger family estates for them. Use the farms near town that were all burnt to the ground, and rebuild them as multi-building complexes with large gardens and small fields. They won't want to become farmers, but they will hire staff to work the fields, as a way to pay tithe and feed the family without dipping into their business resources. Dominic nodded. I actually have the plans for exactly that. The Earl approved all new buildings when he was in charge, and the plans are in the library. The houses of the family compounds all face inward, using the buildings instead of an outer wall, with a wooden perimeter fence between outer buildings, as no stone walls were allowed around commoners' homes. I don't know when that rule started, but it was in place all my life. So, like the ones that are still standing, 5 or 6 buildings facing a central courtyard, with one gate and a wooden fence. One of the maids came in and silently handed Dominic the plans he was referring to, as they had been left on the table with others that pertained to the development of the village. Perfect. What does everyone think of this design? Do the curved tiles and fieldstone walls work for everyone else? They will be easier than fully wooden houses, he asked. Julio examined the plans and then nodded. That will be perfect. The back gate can lead to the outer gardens and fields, while the main gate faces the road. I will ask that the architect they send is familiar with Wavemate's design styles, and that he brings a whole team to work on the village. It will be way beyond our planned budget. However, given the revenue that we have received so far, it is within the funding that we have currently available. Without touching the princess dowry, or selling any soft assets, that is. Though, if Duke Dominic were to provide some more weapons to the Merchants' Guild, I am certain that the financial impact would be very minimal. Dominic sighed, and Pops laughed. The old dwarf had been right from the start. As he had said the very first day that Dominic worked with him, once you start making weapons, you can't stop. Dinner quickly devolved into plans to upgrade the village, and hastily scrawled potential city maps. The open area between the village and the manor was turning out to be their greatest asset, as it gave them the perfect place to put the new housing, while still being attractive to the occupants. Living on the outskirts of town was nice, if you had a large family and enough money to support a staff to take care of a large compound. But for most of the residents, especially the ones who were coming to work in other shops, it was better to have smaller units available, and in an area that could be said to be relatively safe. Putting those houses in between the manor and the sheriff's office was perfect as far as safety was concerned. Plus, it gave them the opportunity to make the new housing resistant to invasion. All they had to do was to turn the buildings to face each other, with an end building turning the area into a dead-end street. But there was an issue with that as well, and Dominic noticed it immediately. Streets like this in the city are the most dangerous areas to be. The criminal elements will move in and monitor the entrance, knowing that those who come in have no other way out. Not just for outsiders, but it can be incredibly dangerous for the locals as well, and it might lead to problems that we're just not ready to deal with. He noted. Alexis looked at her proposed map in dismay. From a military standpoint, it was brilliant, as long as you were the defenders. But trying to clear the area if it became overrun with gang activity? Pure nightmare. The area wasn't just a trap, it was a shooting gallery. Alright, that might not be the best. But what if we left both ends open? Then the side streets would be residential facing each other, and from the main road, the first floors of the buildings could all be used as shops, with residential above them, which enters from the back. She suggested. Dominic and Julio both nodded. That works for me. Normally, I would suggest putting the shops up about 3 meters, with no basement windows on the main street side. But this village isn't expecting much horse traffic. Is it? Julio suggested. Alexis laughed. The man was utterly practical. Moving the main floor up and having windowless basements or low walls between the basement entrance and the street was standard design for older cities with many horses. The dung tended to pile up and gave the main roads a rather distinct odor. However, that issue had long since been solved in the more advanced cities. Even in most of the village's insignia, they limited the places that you could take a horse so that the cleanup was relatively easy. Which reminded Dominic, he would have to have someone make a street sweeper at some point. Westover had originally just had a mage come through with magic and push it all into a compost pile for the farmers to gather fertilizer from. However, he hadn't found a spell gem of any sort in the village, so the technique was likely lost. Once dinner finished, Dominic and Alexis retired to the library for the evening. The princess was in the middle of a romance novel, and Dominic needed to work on his spell book a little more. He was getting close to advancing it again, and while it took a lot of work to get to every level, even 1 or 2 more would make such a large difference to the speed with which he could do infrastructure projects that it would definitely be worth it. An hour after they curled up together on one of the sofas, Alexis tilted her head back to look at him. "Do you think that we are going to see more attacks by mages and monsters right away?" Dominic wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her forehead. "I can almost guarantee it. But we've got people looking into where these last ones might have come from, and we will have a defense force soon enough. Having monsters attacking the village isn't optimal, but it is also a chance to stock up on monster cores for the future city guard force. They're going to need spell gems once we have a real force and not just a militia, and that means they'll need to level them up, and the officers will need a bit of a boost." He replied. Alexis slumped down against his chest. "You know, I had thought that they had given up on that. But now that we've found one, I'm wondering if there are more still hiding in the region. There are no other people around to have reported them, so there could actually be a significant force still hiding in the wilderness of the Stantia province." The princess slapped at Dominic's hand as it wandered a bit too high up her belly, but Dominic was mostly lost in thought. "I will speak to the general and have him change the training to make a town guard immediately and not just a militia. We might not have many who can take up the position, but we have a lot of soldiers. If nothing else, I can at least arm the duchy well enough that scattered groups like the one that we encountered won't become a major threat. However, it might be best to report this to the king. If these mages are still affiliated with Dagos or Prince Kaizan, he will want to know." Alexis nodded. "I will inform them in the next message. I don't expect any sort of reinforcements for at least a few months, but we might get a shipment of military supplies at the very least." She agreed. "That would go a long way. I will leave the details to you. You're better versed than I am in all things military anyhow." Dominic agreed with a teasing smile. "And you love me for it. Now, enough deep talk. It's time for bed, husband." Dominic rolled over as the morning sun hit his face, then shifted so that he was still blocking it from Alexis' face. His whole upper body was covered in slowly fading love bites and claw marks, but Dominic noticed that the rate of natural healing was distinctly faster than it had been even a week ago. The change was unlikely to be due to age. 1 week older wouldn't make much difference. But it might be due to his increased magical affinity, as he had been practicing so much. Dragons were innately magical creatures, and most of their power lay in their magical abilities. So, the more magic that he awakened, the more of his draconic bloodline he would have access to. Dominic didn't know what that would mean for him in the future, but for now, just being able to heal from an evening of strenuous exercise and minor injuries in a few hours' sleep was enough of a benefit. Movement in the corner of the room caught his attention, and Dominic watched one of the maids setting out breakfast for them, as well as the amusement shining in her eyes. Unlike some nobles, they didn't require a maid to be on duty all night, waiting on their call. The master bedroom had bell pulls, and they could ring to wake someone up if it was urgent, but most nights they wouldn't need anything of the sort. The kitchen staff was already up in the small hours of the morning to get the day's work underway, and that was the most likely group of staff that they might need. "My lord," You have guests waiting downstairs. I have set out clothing for you on the dressing table in the shower. She informed him in a soft voice. Thank you. Please come stand over here. Dominic replied, with a gesture at a spot between him and the window. The maid looked confused, but complied as Dominic got out of bed. Perfect. Now, if you move, the light will hit her face, and it won't be my fault. The maid's soft giggle followed Dominic into the shower, where he quickly prepared for the day and headed back to grab a bit of breakfast before starting his workday. The guests were one of the farmers with tattoos from his neck to his knuckles, and the more practical of the techno-wizards. Both bowed politely when Dominic came down the stairs, then got right to business. My lord, Pops informed us that you might be willing to pay for road improvements. I have reserved a tractor for the day, and the attachments are ready. The farmer informed him. That man is a treasure. He always knows what I need. Yes, I was planning to ask for exactly that. I want the roads improved from here to each of the barony manors, so that cargo can move over stone roads and not get bogged down during the rainy season. Dominic agreed. The techno-wizard nodded. We can do that in one day. With the steam tractors to level and pack everything, all it needs is 10 centimeters of stone to make a decent surface. When that stone cracks, it will break into large bricks, and we will have a rough cobblestone road. Not the smoothest surface, but still sturdy enough that the wagons won't get bogged down in the mud. The farmer nodded. I worked on an imperial road crew for a while, and I can make a proper road. My magic might not be as good as the elder, but driving the tractor while keeping an earth transformation spell active is easy enough. Dominic nodded. So, each of you will take half the road? The techno-wizard shook his head. No, I will do the gravel underlay as that needs to be thicker, and he will transform the top layer of dirt into stone. Don't worry. We will make roads that will last a generation. Dominic chuckled. Some of the stone roads, like the river highway that ran through Kynwyn and into Axbridge, were centuries old, and simply had their upper stones repaired once a generation as wagon wheels rutted them. So, he reached into his storage and handed each of the men a few gold coins, the daily rate for a skilled magician. Both smiled. Thank you for your generosity, Your Grace. We won't let you down. Then the farmer motioned east out the door. You should know there is a caravan coming from Signia as well. Not merchant guild, not army. Most likely, someone got word that there is a lord who isn't overrun with refugees and might have food. The hunters had a bad feeling about them, so the new guards are all expecting trouble. Dominic sighed. I should have expected that today wouldn't go so easily. All right, I will go and meet them. Where is the sheriff right now? The farmer shrugged. Likely at the inn having breakfast. He's another terrible cook if it's not biscuits and beans, so he often drops in for breakfast and dinner. Dominic smirked as he heard the kitchen staff laughing. Perhaps it's not sword handling but basic cooking classes that we should be teaching the men of Westover. I will go find the sheriff, and we will sort everything out before they trouble any of the farms. The trio parted ways when they left the manor, as the inn was on the other side of town from the smithy, where the equipment was parked. But the farmer had been right. The sheriff was at the inn for breakfast, sitting on the patio so he could watch the convoy approaching the outlying farms. If they started trouble, he could be there in 2 minutes on horseback. Nate, how's breakfast? Lord Dominic, nearly done my coffee. Should we go greet the caravan before someone gets run through with a spear? They're already breaking off to pilfer fields. Fortunately, they were still far enough out that they were not in the freshly worked ones. Sheriff Nate agreed. His gray eyes narrowed in annoyance. They didn't bother with the horse, and simply jogged out of town, stretching out their muscles for the morning. With the magical physical enhancements that both had, even a few kilometers was just a light warm-up. Nate had his badge hung from his vest, making it immediately obvious that he was a lawman, while Dominic was in a red and gold coat that was impossible to mistake for anything but a nobleman. The fact that both had rifles slung over their shoulders was the part that made the convoy come to an immediate stop, though. Looking at the refugees, it was obvious why the farmers had been suspicious of them. They looked more like a bandit group than actual refugees. Some had rags on, and they all looked a bit too skinny. but some were wearing expensive jewelry that didn't match their clothing, and the visible gang tattoos said that most of them weren't upstanding citizens to begin with. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Westover Duchy. What brings you all this way on such a fine morning? Nate greeted them with his hand casually on his pistol holster. The closest of the refugees raised his hands in a placating gesture. Sheriff, we mean no harm, we're just looking for a safe spot to settle down. We came from Castle City when the food started to get low. The Merchants Guild showed up with relief supplies from upriver. And you're the first inhabited spot we've found that isn't in a worse spot than Castle City. The man replied. Nate frowned. Are you willing to work for your keep? We don't accept layabouts, beggars, or thieves. A few of the refugees looked amused at the thought. One sheriff wasn't nearly enough to keep a town free of unsavory sorts. Dominic smiled. The king has given me free rein to deal with criminals as I see fit. So far, we haven't had many issues, but I have no issue reminding the world why they call me the Butcher of Westover. Most of the refugees went pale in the face at that announcement. They had lived near this border all their lives. Half the population lived in fear that whatever cursed being lived on the other side of the border would come looking for them if they were out after dark. Nate gave Dominic a strange look. Was that the sort of thing that you told people with your full chest? The Butcher of Westover was a horror story you whispered by candlelight, with the windows shut tight. Not someone who faced you with a smile and promises of violence in the morning light. But Dominic kept speaking. We do have a number of farms empty at the moment, for those willing to work the land. Housing in town is limited, but we are building more. If you would like to permanently settle in Westover, you are welcome. If not, we can help you along your way, though I can't promise that there will be anywhere worth stopping. The cities in Stantia province have the same issue that Castle City does, and the relief food shipment came from the duchy. The refugee group's leader waved the others closer. So, you're saying that all that food, 3 whole carts, came from here? Dominic nodded. The king purchased a whole harvest to provide relief supplies for Castle City. That means the wild crops we found aren't just luck? The other fields are still producing well, he asked. Dominic nodded. Indeed. The man paused, and someone behind him spoke up. And no pretentious nobles telling us how to live our lives? That made both Dominic and Nate laugh. What? Did you miss the part where I am Dominic Wavemates, the Duke of Westover? My rules might be less pretentious compared to some others, but there is very little mercy for those who break them. Dominic explained. There was a lot of discussion among the refugees, and the group slowly started to separate into 2 factions. Dominic pretended that he couldn't hear the whispered slurs about demi-humans pretending to be noble, or about an upstart duke who thought that the peasantry was something that he could control just by setting rules. Alexis insisted that his innate bias toward the people of Wavemates clouded his thought processes when determining who was trustworthy. But this sort of casual disrespect was something that human nobles didn't ever have to deal with. After a few minutes, the arguments started to get heated enough that Nate was considering whether he should step in, but the refugee group sorted it out by themselves. Fine, if you want to stay here with some demi-human playing at being a duke, you can, but we're going to look for a respectable noble estate who can take us in. There was no shortage of casualties during the war. There has to be empty land. One of the men insisted. Nate cleared his throat. In that case, follow the river to the highway, then head west. There are entire abandoned villages there, which will soon have established Signia nobles taking over their management. You will have a place to stay, and an old blood family in charge of your territory. He omitted the part where many of the people who were currently here in Westover had come from the Coster area, 100 and some kilometers west of the river, down the highway. The situation there wasn't great, but there were plenty of empty villages and tilled fields, ready to be taken over by new residents, assuming they didn't starve to death before they could get a harvest in. After the refugee group's leaders separated the ones willing to stay and work from the ones who were either grifters or simply didn't want to stay here, there were only 10 remaining. The others simply kept moving along, bypassing the village entirely, while the local farmers watched them suspiciously. As they passed out of sight, the man who had first greeted them turned to Dominic. How did you know, Your Grace? Dominic shrugged. That they were trouble? I didn't, not really. I just went with the feeling that they were giving the locals. The vibe that a group of refugees gives is actually pretty reliable. If they were looking for work, they would have been paying more attention to the land, looking for good places to settle. But other than looking to fill their bags with wild vegetables, the group wasn't interested. The leader of the small group that stayed chuckled. Well, it's not like any of us know the first damn thing about farming. We're all city folk from the outskirts of Castle City. Our homes were destroyed during the attacks, but frankly, we're tired of living in an overcrowded slum. The others, they all came from somewhere else, thinking they'd make it big with their skills. But there's no work anywhere, and no empty shops to set up in, even if they had money for inventory.
Nate sighed.
So, now we get to find a spot for the lot of you. I don't suppose any of you are family members. 4 of the 10 raised their hands and the sheriff smiled. Well, that's a start. That means we've got 6 singles and no rooming house. Dominic shrugged. There are still a few empty houses until we get one built. Sharing a house with others is better than sleeping in the mud. Let's get you all settled, and you can introduce yourself around looking for work. There isn't much here either, but there are plenty of new shops who might need someone who knows how to prove themselves. By the time that they got to the village, Julio was ready with a selection of housing options, and good news from the Merchants Guild. My lord, the guild got my message, and they will be sending a full construction crew with a Magitech architect on the next convoy. They are guild employees, so the rate will be reasonable but not cheap. These are the houses that are ready to move into. How did you want to separate these folk? He asked. There is one family and then a bunch of singles, but we don't have a rooming house in town yet. Just pick one of the larger houses, and they can sort out bedrooms and living arrangements. Dominic replied. One of the women gave him a hopeful look, and Dominic nodded. Right? Also, they will be looking for work if you have a list of anyone who is hiring. Julio gave a grim chuckle. Oh, there are folks hiring, but not for the greatest jobs. The tanner needs extra hands. The butcher needs an apprentice who can heft a side of meat. And the techno-wizards want someone to work the counter who won't blow a hand off moving things around. Dominic winced. I trust that someone managed to get the unfortunate clerk to the healer? Julio nodded. Yeah, they tossed him in a cart and took him out to Larry's place. He'll be there a couple of days while he recovers. One of the newly arrived men smiled. I will go talk to the techno-wizard. I worked at an artificer's shop when I was in school, to pay tuition. What did you study? Julio asked, ready to make a note of someone who might be helpful in the future. Classical literature. Or maybe not. He might make a good school teacher, though. The one who came with the lot from Grampiot was frankly terrifying, and he pitied the kids who were in her classes. The father of the family group bowed slightly to the castellan. If you can point me toward the butcher, I have some experience in that field. My father was a huntsman, and while I didn't follow the family trade, I do at least know the basics of properly butchering an animal. One street past the inn on the right. He'll be happy to see you if you've got the skills. Now, I know that nobody wants jobs at the tannery. Smells awful, it's hot, and the pay isn't great. But it's work if anyone wants it. If not, there should be plenty of odd jobs for handymen around town. Talk to John, the carpenter. He's doing most of the renovation work on the old houses, and he knows the budget for hiring workers. Julio explained. Dominic considered their options for moving forward. Eventually, the city was going to need an industry, something that people could do beyond serving as a marketplace for food exports, and an industry that would employ a large number of people. The obvious answer was something Magitech related, as they had so many magically adept residents in town who would be looking for work for themselves and their children. For the moment, many of them were just getting by with what they could find, but the work for farmhands was primarily in the planting and harvest seasons. The tractors had taken a lot of the need for extra labor out, but there was still quite a bit available. He could try for something military, as it would make a lot of money, but they were rather remote here, and that would make getting weapons to those who needed them difficult to do in a timely manner. So, they could focus on the transport aspect. Perhaps manufacturing roadwork machines? It shouldn't take too much to design one, and though it would take a trained operator, it would be incredibly valuable. With so many smaller roads to be upgraded, it would take years to get to them all. But that was still only a few years' worth of work before there would be enough of the machines to keep up with maintenance. Perhaps they should diversify. If they had a couple of factories in town, they would have a better chance of weathering downturns in demand. Perhaps one to make vehicles and one to make something else? It would have to be an unrelated field, but there was an ongoing demand for Magitech vehicles. The taste of the nobles was constantly changing, and when you introduced them to a new design, many would want it. Then there was the discard factor. Old designs would be sold off to less wealthy nobles, and then eventually scrapped when they were run to the point they needed constant repairs. That kept the cycle of demand going strong, so it should be a solid base for the town. The question was whether they should risk going with a weapons factory, or if he should just focus on the things everyone needed. Making Magitech lamps might not sound glamorous, but the vast majority of the continent still didn't have them. If they started to mass-produce them, it would take a lifetime to make enough for them to spread to every common home, and by then, the first batch would need replacing. Another solid industry, as long as they had a skilled enough designer to keep up with the times. "You look deep in thought, my lord," Sheriff Nate joked quietly. "Just thinking of ways to get everyone back to work. But we need 3 things: factories, workers who can mass-produce Magitech, and somewhere to train the workers." The sheriff chuckled. "Well, I'm sure that we can find a few skilled teachers to run a class on basic Magitech engineering for factory workers. But what would you even want to make and sell?" "Lamps." The sheriff smiled. "Magitech lights are the most underrated life-altering invention of our time. Seeing the lights on after dark at the farmhouses is a strange thing. We all know that they're not wealthy folk, but with the light, they don't have to stop at dark, and they can get started early, so they can be on the field at first light." Dominic nodded. "Exactly. It extends the day. The tractors have lights for the same reason. But we might not need to just make lamps. If we can mass-produce Magitech stoves for cooking and heating, water pumps to give houses running water, and incinerating toilets, we can become the best source for all things lifestyle improvement. 2 lines of everything. Simple for the commoners, fancy for the nobles. And then we all get rich." Nate agreed. With the new arrivals headed to town, Dominic returned to the manor to speak with the princess about his plans. She was likely going to have a better plan than the rough outline that he had come up with. She was much more details-oriented than he was, and he wanted to have something worked out before the next caravan got here so that they could get word right to the top levels of the Merchants Guild. Getting teachers for a Magitech factory would be the hardest part. But the guild would also know what sold the fastest, what had the largest margin between materials and selling price, and other important details. Julio would know some of it as an accountant, but most of what he would know was the margins that the guild itself had on items that they bought and sold, not so much on items that didn't often get sold on the open market. Magitech most commonly sold directly from the creator to the noble who ordered it. Fortunately for Dominic, lights were simple if you didn't mind a bit of discoloration. The ones in the manor simply used a piece of quartz crystal, set into the top of a Magitech orb sitting on a holder. The flow of mana lit up the crystal, and the glass of the lampshade diffused the light. Easy, but fragile. As expected, Alexis was in the library, which she used more like an office, as she preferred to be surrounded by books at all times instead of sitting in the actual office. She closed one book and prepared to change notebooks, moving on to a new topic. "Perfect timing. Before you get started on the next thing, I have a proposal I want to run by you." Dominic began. Alexis nodded and gestured for him to sit across from her. "All right. What is your brilliant idea of the day?" Dominic smiled as he realized the book she had been about to open was the Duchy's financial report book. "Work projects for the people. We're attracting magic users in droves, and we are likely to get more, so it occurred to me that we could use a Magitech factory owned directly by the Duchy. The simple things that every house should have, but that most can't currently afford. If we mass-produced Magitech lights, toilets, and pumps with water creation gems in them, we could bring the standard of not only the Duchy, but all of Signia ahead by decades. Now just cheap stuff. Good stuff for the nobles, upgrades that they would be proud to have. but also budget versions that any reasonably successful working family could afford if they wanted. Lamps change everyday life, especially for the ones who work the longest hours. But I'm also not a fan of the just dump it in the river solution to sewage that most cities have. So, I want incinerating toilets, and then we can let the plumbing dispose of shower and dishwater. Dominic explained. You know, most of the houses in town simply throw their dishwater into the garden. Alexis reminded him. Oh, good point. I wonder if there is an effective way to filter shower water? We could just let it fill barrels on the property, and then they can water gardens with it. Everyone has one for the rain gutters already. Dominic realized. That might be a bit expensive for the common person. How is the current plumbing system built? Alexis asked. Dominic shrugged. It runs from the house to the edge of the road, so when they shower, it just runs into the storm drains. I will have all the new streets built the same way, and the storm drains lead to the river. Alexis smiled. And that's why you don't want hundreds more flush toilets? Because it all flows into the river, and your nose is sensitive. Plus, city water is disgusting enough without being downriver of that. Dominic agreed. That was hard to argue with. It was also a far superior solution to the other options that many cities still relied upon. All right, we already have an architect and his team on the way from the Merchants Guild, and they can do the design for the factory as well. Once you decide what they're making anyhow, you can enlist the techno-wizards if you want, and look through the village for others with some skill as artificers. But we might need to make a very specific request if we're going to start that sort of factory. Magitech items aren't something that just anyone can make from a blueprint. Alexis reminded him. Right, magic didn't work the same way for most people as it did for those with dragon blood. He had forgotten all about that for a moment, but it shouldn't be too hard to find workers with some skills in the area. After all, they had been basically run out of Dagos unless they fit the perfect image of what Dagos thought that a magic user should be. Plus, if they had skills but didn't want to open a shop on their own, or didn't have the finances to try to compete with the shops that were already open, these would be incredibly high-paying jobs compared to nearly anything else that they could do. It might be factory work, but it was Magitech factory work, and that came with a level of respect. There wasn't much more that they could do today, and Julio was already off to make notes of what houses everyone had moved into, and what skills they had. The man went well above and beyond his technical duties, a habit from his time with the Merchants Guild, where information was everything. That was a lesson that Dominic realized he should probably take to heart and get to know more of the people on a personal basis. But that could wait for a few days while he worked on his spell book and got some sketches done for the basic Magitech items that he wanted to become the core of their manufacturing facility. After 4 days of relative peace and hard work, the guard on duty reported a merchant guild caravan coming from the west. They were about to cross the bridge and head into the village with 6 trucks, so Dominic went out to meet them. With any luck, this should be the convoy with their architect. Dominic had dozens of pages of sketches ready for various products, and now he was ready to start with the true test of all his efforts, proving that they worked. But with the merchant caravan coming, it would have to wait. The caravan didn't turn into the village when they crossed the river. Instead, they turned to park in front of the ducal manor, confirming Dominic's suspicion that the architect and his team were on board. The convoy came to a stop just as Dominic stepped onto the porch. The Merchant Guild representative hopped down and walked over with a huge smile on his face, much more enthusiastic than delivering contracted workers would justify, no matter his cut of the commission. Duke Wistover, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I have just what your duchy has been looking for, he declared. Oh? It sounds like you brought me something more than just an architect, Dominic replied. The merchant nodded happily. Indeed I did. The Merchants Guild bought out the Bethersia prisoner auction in Bridman. We have managed to get you almost an entire mage tower. Now, the authorities executed the sect leader and all the elders, but we managed to get most of the acolytes, and the price is very reasonable. Dominic narrowed his eyes in suspicion. There had to be a catch. Bethersia wasn't the biggest fan of sorcerers and demihumans, but they didn't have a law against their presence. So, if they had purged an entire mage tower, there was likely an excellent reason for it. which meant that these were likely to be genuine criminals. Criminals that had such a reputation that the Merchants Guild had brought them with the caravan for nearly 4,000 kilometers. Nobody kept stock that long, and especially not an entire mage tower. Mages had genuine skills, they were welcome everywhere. Even if they had to be auctioned off one at a time and put under supervision, they should have all been sold long before they got anywhere near Stantia province. They had come across 2 countries after they left Bethersia, after all. All right, what are the details? I will buy up the contracts if they're not going to be a disruptive force. Dominic agreed. That made the merchant a bit nervous, and he immediately changed the topic. We can discuss that at the end of our delivery. I have brought your architect as well. He's got a 3-man team with him, and all are skilled in the construction arts. He waved the men forward, and the architect bowed to Dominic, while subtly speaking in the wavemate's hand language. Prince Dominic, welcome home. I look forward to working with you to rebuild the village. Dominic smiled. Welcome to Westover. We have grand plans for the village. Not just the burnt houses, but also for apartment blocks and factories. I intend to make an entire Magitech factory in town, to serve as our primary export. The architect nodded happily. And which family might own the factory? I will make plans to arrange it in the off hours of rebuilding the village. Mine. The factory will be owned by the duchy directly, and I am hoping that we can find a few suitable Magitech engineers to train the workers. I wish to export Magitech household goods. Lights, restroom facilities, showers, and such. Not just for noble houses, but in bulk without ornamentation for common homes. Dominic explained. The architect and the merchant shared an excited smile. So, you wish to bring back the glory days of a fully magical society, but with Magitech? We will fully support that mission. The merchant agreed. Villagers and farmers were beginning to make their way toward the caravan, and the merchant turned his attention their way. You have more food again? Didn't anybody tell Westover that there is a famine going on? So much cropland was destroyed, and the rest of the eastern continent is in a drought. Signia is mostly breaking even, but many regions are starting to ration. But even Mitfield is running short on food in the cities. He explained. Dominic shrugged. We've got good fields and witches. We haven't even had to turn on the irrigation yet, which is probably a good thing because most of it is broken. We should move the mages before the farmers get here. There are things you should know. The merchant gestured. Obviously, you move them across 2 entire countries without selling them. Dominic replied. Don't you think that I would have gotten rid of them if I could? You'll understand when you are around them for a few minutes. The mages came out of the caravan in an unhurried line, looking around in awe at their surroundings and chatting excitedly. Wilkes nudged Carl's shoulder. Why is there a whole group of Puritans here? He whispered. Their tower was expelled from Bethersia, so we're gaining some mages. At least most likely. It's not finalized yet. Dominic replied. The royal guard frowned. Those weren't just mages. They were Vestal virgins of the Purity sect mage clans. They were cursed to cause immense pain to anyone who touched them with ill intent or lewd intentions. Their clan wasn't local to Signia, but every royal guard knew who they were. The most insufferable humans on the face of the planet. At least from a guardsman's point of view. And you want to take them in to form a new mage tower here? Wilkes confirmed. Most definitely. They make excellent advisors because they know you can't slap them for speaking their mind without hurting yourself. Dominic joked. One of the mages, a young acolyte boy who might not yet be in his teens, giggled as he heard Dominic's comment. Julio ushered the mages into the house, where Dominic could hear them politely greeting the staff, and Beth fussing about how skinny they all were. They might get along just fine. The architectural team sighed as they saw the mages go inside. You're going to have trouble with those ones, my lord. They absolutely refuse to break a contract, and insist it's beneath their dignity to do anything less than speak the whole truth. Even when they're being absolute jerks about it. The architect insisted. Wilkes nodded in agreement, and Dominic shrugged. Well, we can have you build them a nice tower on the edge of town where they won't bother anyone. But what contract could they have that would be an issue for me? Are they currently working for someone else? He asked. The merchant laughed grimly. No, their criminal slave contract. They were sentenced to a life of servitude and sold. But the contract requires that, in order to be transferred, the owner must take a fair price for them. It's a normal thing for prisoner contracts, but what is fair is usually up to interpretation. The thing is, they refuse to accept negotiations, and every time I've tried to kick them out for a handful of coppers, the magic of the contract stops me from leaving town. The merchant looked over his shoulder to where the closest of farmers were already approaching with carts. Your people are far too proactive. They didn't even check if I had space before bringing over trade goods. He joked. Dominic shrugged. There is always space by the time a convoy gets this far. The process hasn't failed them yet. Besides, their pantries are full and we're running out of canning jars. Unless you brought a bunch, that is. Not worried that I will try to lowball them because they have excess? Dominic smirked and pointed to the large half-ogre woman who was coming from one of the farms closest to the manor. If you try to scam her, she's likely to take you over her knee, and I'm not sure that you can stop her. The merchant gave the woman an appraising smile. Now that's a whole lot of woman. Reminds me a bit of my own mother, that one. Except for the face. I will let you get to business, and you can check in with me when you are ready to leave, so I can give you your commission payment. Dominic explained, then turned to lead the architect into the house. The mages were all sitting in a group on the floor facing Alexis, who had turned one of the padded recliners to face them. Beth had brought food for them all, sandwiches and soup, but they had chosen not to eat at the table. Took Dominic a moment, then he realized the issue. They refused to go against the rules. Any rules. So, as they were currently condemned prisoners, they were refusing to eat at a noble's table. Dominic could understand why everyone got frustrated trying to deal with them. But once they were in a tower with even basic directions, they should be a valued asset to the duchy. Julio handed the architect and his people the prepared work contracts, as well as the stack of potential city designs that they had come up with. The actual building designs would be up to them, but some of the original plans were there for reference. This shouldn't be an issue. We're all familiar with the traditional styles and construction methods. The wages and terms are what we were expecting. The only thing we will ask is leeway to alter the layout as needed to keep city design functional and safe for residents. The architect requested. Alexis nodded. That shouldn't be an issue. If there are safety concerns, you can address them before the buildings even go up. As long as they have the basic amenities that we requested, you're free to do your job as you see fit. Now, I have one more suggestion, though it's not part of the contract. Perhaps you would like to stay in the manor for the first few days and begin the reconstruction with your own homes? We are beginning to run short of homes in town, and I suspect that you would not care for a hunter's lodge or a farmhouse. Dominic offered. The men smiled and bowed politely. Then we will prevail upon your grace's generous offer. Indeed, we are not well suited to life on a farm. We did come with a full set of household goods, though. The architect gestured to the ring on his finger, and Dominic nodded. That makes things much easier. The surviving homes mostly had the basics, so we will save them for the refugees. The locals have also salvaged as much as possible from the burnt homes, but the vast majority of goods did not survive the fires. They would have to make new ones at some point, but obtaining pots, dishes, and bedding was much easier than creating the house to put them in. Then Dominic turned to the mages. So, I am told that you are requiring a fair payment for the transfer of your contracts. That likely wasn't easy to get at any of the other locations. Not many will pay good money for criminals that they can't discipline or abuse, even if you are skilled mages. Well, I assume that you're skilled mages and not just a bunch of fresh acolytes who don't know one end of a rune string from another. One of the older boys laughed, and a teen girl shushed him. Duke Dominic, I don't know if you are aware, but the magic imbued in our oaths requires us to uphold all contracts we have made. We agreed to this contract in exchange for escaping execution. It requires fair payment to transfer ownership, so we cannot allow it to transfer without payment. She explained. Dominic nodded. What did the Merchants Guild pay for you? 5 silver coins each, the standard rate for fresh convicts. Then I will give him 7.5 silver coins for each of you, a 50% profit on his investment. Dominic offered. The mages all looked confused for a moment, and Dominic realized that they had been calculating in a very different way, likely based on the lifetime earnings potential of a mage. But when Dominic framed it this way, it would definitely seem unfair for him to make thousands of times his investment just to transport them for a while, especially when they had helped with all the domestic duties during the trip and protected the caravan with their magic. What do you propose that you will do with us if you purchase us? One of the boys asked. The princess is looking for a few more trustworthy veiled maids, and if you hold true to your clan's oath, then the ladies of the Purity sect should be good for that. The others, I intend to move into a tower in town to work off their sentence. Infrastructure, street cleaning, defensive magic, magitech factory work. All are options suitable to the employment of criminals, and you will be suitably housed and fed for the remainder of your lives. If you want to take in new members, that is fine too. These fine gentlemen will ensure that the tower is large enough for them. The mages simply stared at Dominic for a moment. There was something wrong with his logic, but they couldn't quite place it. While it was true that they were serving a life sentence, it sounded a lot like he intended to be their employer, not their jailer. Did the Duke misunderstand the irrevocable nature of the magical contract they had signed when they were sentenced? But they had underestimated the utter shamelessness of Dominic's plan. He needed magical workers, and these literally could not leave once he purchased their contracts. A loyal base of skilled mages, all of whom were young and sentenced to a lifetime of hard labor? Wasn't that decades of guaranteed skilled workers? Even diverting a few to the Princess Veiled Guard wouldn't harm his efforts to develop the duchy into a cutting-edge magitech factory city. Well, town. It would be some time before they could claim to be anything so grand as a city. After a moment, the mages bowed. We will agree to your fair purchase terms, Your Grace. Please assign us tasks. Alexis smiled as she looked at the group. This will work out perfectly. I will take all 5 of the girls as trainee veiled maids, and they can bolster the domestic staff. Ladies, please follow my assistant to change into your new uniforms. Gentlemen, the first task that we have for you is to assist the architects in preparing an area for housing expansion. After everyone's belongings are unloaded, that is, you will have the honor of helping build your own new home. She wholeheartedly approved of Dominic's choice to take the mages into the house instead of looking for locals. Every noble lady worried about the staff trying to gain favors by sneaking into the Lord's bed when she was away. But these ones were literally incapable of such things. Not that she doubted Dominic's loyalty. Plus, he was pathologically incapable of keeping a secret, and if one of the staff actually offered, he would never be able to hide it from her. Dominic tossed Julio a pouch full of coins to pay the merchant for the mages and the finding fee for the architects, then let them go about their day. The men had a lot of work ahead of them, planning the exact locations, staking out house and street plans for the expansion, and deciding what they would do for a mage tower. It should be obvious to them that Dominic intended to find more mages for the tower, so they would make it with plenty of extra space. Having all those extra mages would make life much easier for the architects, and Dominic finally had hope that they could keep up with the influx of refugees. Even a half-dozen apartment blocks built over commercial buildings would go a long way to housing workers, and they shouldn't have to wait long for the factory to be built. It might actually take longer to get the raw materials that they needed for production than to get the factory built. If you will excuse us, my lord, we will go scout the locations right away. We need to unpack our belongings as well, the architect suggested. Take your time, get unpacked, shower, eat. The land will still be there. Dominic agreed. The male mages followed him out just as the girls of the Purity sect came back out in their new uniforms. Simple black dresses with long sleeves and veils covering their lower face. It wasn't difficult to tell them from the sisters, as the mages were all still children, but at least now they looked like proper veiled maids. The sisters led them through the house, pointing out all the various rooms and the chores that went with them. Keeping so many maids in the house seemed a bit excessive, but Dominic could hear the cook welcoming them, and the maids explaining that they had a spare room set up with bunks, so the mages could continue to share a room. At the rate that they were going, Dominic was going to have to put an expansion on the manor as well just to hold all the extra staff. There was an unused barracks building in the area, but that had been vacant long before the invasion and probably wasn't suitable for occupants. He could have them upgrade that later, so they would have somewhere for a standing military force to stay once they had a full-time town guard. They could work on that once the militia was trained. Now that they had experts in place, he could relax a little and let them work on the hard parts while he approved development plans. His spell book was coming along very well, and soon he would be able to create pistols with proper tool steel quality directly from the clay to steel spell. Once he was at that standard, Dominic knew that life would get much easier. Many Magitech items could be created using spells at that level with much simpler tools and materials. It would save him both time and money, and that meant that he could put more effort into developing new products. He had sketches for the simplest of Magitech hanging lamps, and those could be their first product for the factory. But first, he would have to ask the mages if they knew the spell to create simple gems. It was possible, he knew. He just didn't have the spell knowledge. Dominic waved one of the new mages over, and she politely knelt at his feet, the way that royal maids would when being reprimanded. "You're not in trouble. I have a question. Do you know the magic to create quartz crystals for light and water creation Magitech artifacts?" Dominic clarified. She looked vaguely confused, but nodded. "Yes, my lord. Those are basic spells for any acolyte of the Purity Tower." "That is wonderful news. We will be building a factory to make Magitech household goods, and those gems will be critical to our production. Do any of the boys have training in Magitech engineering?" The girl shook her head. "No, my lord. The Purity Tower is a purely magical academy. Or, it was. That reminds me, what was it that got the entire tower purged?" he asked. The girls looked at each other uneasily, unwilling to answer, but bound by their sex rules and the prisoner contract not to lie. The sect leader backed the second prince of Bethersia in the succession battle. The second prince lost and was executed for treason, and his entire faction was purged, including our tower, naturally. We were given a life sentence for providing magical weapons to the rebel forces. The girl explained. Alexis sighed. "I should have known that it would be something like that. Dominic attracts rebel mages like a magnet." The mage bowed her head. "We were acolytes at the tower, hardly involved at all, other than making spell gems and crystals for the seniors. That is why we were granted leniency instead of execution. That explained why they were all so young. Everyone old enough to have joined the battle was killed, either in action or in court. Well, that's not a great reputation to have, but I trust that you and your companions will be loyal and on their best behavior now that you're here and in service to the 9th Princess of Signia. I will check in on the boys later to ensure that they're not thinking of anything improper." Dominic replied. The mages giggled at his phrasing, and Dominic shrugged. There is a lot of trouble that young boys can get into without any inappropriate contact. Alexis turned her attention back to the mages. "You say that you were providing magical weapons to the rebels, but you said that you are not skilled in Magitech." The mage kneeling beside Dominic nodded politely. "Indeed, but the Purity sect is a versatile and traditional mage sect. We are quite skilled at imbuing items with combat magic, even though all our spell gems were confiscated when we were arrested. However, we can only act in self-defense." "That means you can create new spell gems for the spells you know, does it not?" Alexis asked. "Naturally." Alexis smirked at Dominic. "Then I believe we will have additional tasks for you, beyond the domestic duties and training as veiled maids. Our town guard will need to be properly equipped, and I am eager to find out what the acolytes of the Purity sect have retained." The girls were clearly skeptical of her intentions, but they were surprisingly fast to accept Alexis' proposition. "Of course, Your Highness. Whether it is defending your person or helping your people defend themselves, now that our life debt has been transferred to you, we live to serve." The mage girl replied quickly. Then, she did a double take as Dominic patted her head and motioned for her to rise. That was unexpected. If he had any sort of bad intentions, it should have shocked him to the point his arm went numb, at the very least. But nothing had happened to him. Did that mean he didn't view them as females? Or perhaps he viewed them as still being children, and it was an indulgent pat like a parent would give? He was rather young looking for that, though Dragonkin aged slowly. The entire concept of a head pat was confusing to them, as they had been pledged to the purity sect at a young age, and there was no physical contact at all between the members, unless necessary to complete a task. The truth was that Dominic had gotten used to Cutter silently following him around as he toured the territory, and he had briefly forgotten that it was not the aging hunting dog at his side. Her hair was the same sandy brown color as the dog's fur. Dominic rose to his feet and motioned toward the door. "I will go see what is holding up the others. If they have brought a large number of tools, I will see that someone helps them get unloaded." Outside the manor, the young mages were indeed helping the architectural team unload tools into a storage shed. They had brought not just the drafting and design tools that Dominic had expected, they had also brought construction and surveying tools. The farmers had nearly finished their sales, and the last few were haggling with the merchant over the space that was being vacated by the tools the architect and his team had brought. The merchant was politely refusing, as he had no guarantee that he could sell more than he would be picking up at the next stop. But Dominic could see that he was being worn down. The next stop on his route was Limpsbury, and the city was in rough shape since the war. They hadn't taken heavy casualties, but they had lost most of the city's wealth when the Dago's nobles and businessmen had fled during the early days of the occupation. So, while the city wasn't overrun with homeless refugees like Castle City and some others were, there were still plenty of impoverished residents, and even more coming from areas that simply couldn't sustain residents anymore. With the change in leadership, the people of Stantia province were hoping that good things might start to happen to them for the first time in a decade. They needed a lot, but they also needed money. Many apprentices should have taken over the shops by now, and even if the quality wasn't as good as before, it should still be worth buying for the Merchants' Guild. Every little bit counted, and loading up with too much perishable food wasn't the most profitable load at the best of times. And especially not when you were hundreds of kilometers from the next city. Dominic walked over to say goodbye to the merchant, and quietly pocketed the scroll that one of the assistants handed him. "Safe travels, and I do hope to see you again soon. By then, we might even have more to offer than just groceries." Dominic joked. The merchant shook his hand with a smile. "I believe that you will. With so many qualified people here, I look forward to the day when the guild can negotiate a longer-term supply deal with your factories." With their business finished, the merchant caravan packed up and began making their way out of town toward the baronies. They probably wouldn't have anything to trade just yet, but the caravan did have things to sell if they needed them. And this was the last inhabited region they would see for at least a day. Once everything was calm, Dominic went to the office and sat down to read the rolled scroll that the assistant had handed to him. Then he paused when he saw the Mitfield royal seal on the wax. This wasn't just any letter, it was their first official royal communication. But it came from a foreign royal family member, not a local. Stantia province did border the kingdom, so it wasn't as if they were strangers. But to get a message from their royal family with the first caravan that came from that direction was more than a little shocking. If they had followed the main roads for most of the trip, the caravan would have been on the other side of the country from the capital. Carefully, Dominic cracked the wax seal and opened the single-page letter. "Prince Dominic Wavemates, it is a distinct pleasure to hear that your lineage has been recognized by our royal cousin insignia. Please accept my congratulations on being awarded Wistover, and know that I do look forward to seeing what you can do with it. I trust that our wedding gift found its way into your possession, but if not, please accept my apology for the untimely delay. There have been some transport issues in recent times. Prince George Mitfield, Duke of Dunstow, 5th Prince of Mitfield, Lord Commander of the armies." Now it made a bit more sense. Dunstow was one of the cities that the caravan would have passed through, and it was close enough to the border that Mitfield would have staged large military forces there, in case the war breached the borders. But that was not the important part of the innocuous-looking letter. When he had gotten married, he had been given the title of Duke of Wistover, but he had not been made a prince consort of Signia. That distinction would be lost on many, but on another prince? Definitely not. So, what Prince George was saying was that, in some subtle way, Mitfield still recognized the royalty of the Wavemates lineage. Enough that they would address him as such in a letter. His actual qualifications as a prince were questionable, though royal law said that when a lineage was lost, the next closest branch would be elevated. So, under the laws of succession, he was quite likely the highest-ranking prince of the Wavemates family by default. Dominic briefly recalled that more than one person had questioned whether he was actually the princess consort's child, given to a family member to raise. However, without proof to the contrary, he was happy to think of his family as he remembered it. Alexis came in while he was staring at the letter, and Dominic simply turned it over to her, so she could form opinions for herself. So, Mitfield thinks you might be the next Dragon King, do they? But that note about transport delays. There were no battles along the route from their capital to ours, other than the battle at Burton, which was over well before they would have been sending wedding gifts. So, something else is happening that is still delaying shipments and messages between Mitfield and either Stantia province, or all of Signia. Alexis noted. That had escaped Dominic in his first reading. Do you think that there might be Dago's forces hiding in the less inhabited regions near the joint border of Signia, Mitfield and Stantia province? Dominic asked. Alexis nodded. I think that is precisely what he means. There was no need to point out that he was Lord Commander if the letter didn't refer to his military duties. Also, he addressed it directly to you, not to me. I've known Prince George since I was little. He used to be the diplomatic envoy to Signia and lived in the palace. While it's difficult to call anyone with power a true friend, Prince George is like an uncle to me. Yet, he wrote his first letter to you instead, and didn't name me personally. Then she lit a candle and moved the letter over it, revealing a single line of hidden text. Congratulations, Princess. Mr. Bear still sits on the south shelf. Dominic read the line, then waited for Alexis to explain as she was lost in nostalgia. The south shelf is what Mitfield calls the Coster Plateau along the Wavemates side of the border. Mr. Bear is a stuffed toy that I gave to his youngest daughter for her 3rd birthday 2 years ago. It's over a meter tall, and she absolutely refused to release it for an entire week. She even brought it to dinner in the palace. That's the last time we spoke in person, as he returned to Mitfield after that visit. So, there is a military issue on the border but within Stantia province. One that he can't openly report or send the Mitfield army after. They might be staging to use the Maltenden River to get into Signia. Or it might be leftovers from the monster invasion, and the mages who were behind them. Dominic theorized. Alexis nodded. Or it might just be whoever is behind Prince Kaizan and his insane antics. We've already seen one attack, and it's no secret where we live. They may be preparing for vengeance against the most remote Signia princess. If that was the case, they were in for a world of hurt. Now that Westover had a proper group of mages, all of whom had been trained in combat magic so they could make magical weapons, it would be extremely difficult to invade the duchy. You should make new artillery for the defenders. I will announce the change of plans from a militia force to a full-time town guard force. We've already got all the men we need. Alexis decided. I will go talk to the tailors. Dominic agreed. A proper town guard needed a bit more ornamentation than the militia did. At the very least, an emblem of service so everyone would know who they were. If you were going to rain artillery on your enemies, you needed to do it in style,